This is the beginning of 3 months in Europe. So the build up to this trip was really exciting. But my first day in Europe, specifically London, was so exhausting and so anxiety filled. So on the first day when I arrived, jet lagged, tired, and I remember like London was so gloomy and rainy that day, and having to drag my luggage across everywhere. Oh my gosh, that was horrible. And on top of that, I could feel that there were a lot of eyes on me. People were just like looking at me, probably because my luggage was making so much noise, rattling on the cobblestone floors, and yeah, just looking like an absolute tourist. I think we spent like the better part of the whole morning, all the way until like 2 or 3 p.m. dragging our luggages around the place, and we finally got to the hostel. And even when we got to the hostel, I remember we were just so tired, we just wanted to get a nap. So I just chucked all my luggage into a locker, I put a lock on it, and I went to sleep. And I think less than 10 minutes in, okay, maybe not 10 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, right? Somewhere around there. Some guys come in and he's just like, oh, who put this lock here? And he was making a huge, big problem about it. And I was the only one that put a lock on the locker. So I started crawling out of my bed. And basically he thought that I had put a lock on his girlfriend's locker and I've locked his girlfriend's stuff inside. But once I opened it and he realized there was nothing, he apologized for it. But still, it just made me so anxious in that moment because like, oh my gosh, some guy is like shouting at me and trying to confront me about something, and I was just too tired for all this. So I remember after that, my friend and I, we just not packed our stuff, we just got changed and then we went downstairs to the basement of this hostel, and they had this like movie area, right? And I remember we just like sat there and we just all passed out. We just passed out on the couch for like I think like 30 minutes to an hour. And yeah, that was just such an exhausting first day. And just to top it off, at that point, after our little like nap that we had in the basement, we had to get dinner. And that's when I realized how expensive it is to eat out overseas, or specifically in Europe in general. But I was not used to the prices, and yeah, that was rough. But luckily we found like this 1-for-1 thing, some doner kebab thing. So yeah, that was our dinner, and I remember it being pretty nice. It was the highlight of the day. But it's not difficult. The day was shit. Yeah, it was a really rough first day. It was scary, it was exhausting. But yeah, the second day it was way better. We were still wary from day one, but after ditching the luggage and having like a proper night's sleep, like my mind was more ready to be a tourist and travel and see things. So we slowly walked around, we went to Camden Market, and I remember along the way, I think the highlight of that place was definitely this underground looking spectacle shop. Like all the way at the end of the market, I don't know what the name of the place is, but it was just so cool. It was like something that I don't think you'd really see in Singapore, at least, or actually in Asia. It's really unique, very special place. And I also remember we visited some nice architecture. We went to this place called Cold Drops Yard, and with these curved things that kind of go together, and wow, yeah. The second day, like as we traveled more, we saw more of these places. My fear of London and fear of the place that I was in slowly just melted away. And I remember at the start of the day, I was still telling my friend, like, I absolutely hated this place. I wanted to get the hell out of here. I can't wait to go to Amsterdam and meet my friends. But after that day, yeah, I think I'll definitely be back to London. After those 2 days in London, we left early in the morning to Amsterdam, and we finally met the rest of the group of our friends, and it was so relieving to be halfway across the world and finally see some familiar faces. You know, the first 2 days were just absolutely like exhausting. Second day not as much, but still just the anxiety of it, you know, and finally seeing familiar faces just brought me so much relief and so much comfort. Yeah, and from there on, we went to Amsterdam, Hamburg, Berlin, and Dresden. And yeah, the rest of the trip just was really laid back, really chill. The first week was just so rainy. So for the most part, we went to mostly indoor attractions, things like museums, which was really nice actually. We went to cafes along the way, and yeah, in general, just took it really chill, really laid back. Oh, I remember we saw a really nice place in Hamburg. Like, we went to some nice architectural places in Hamburg. We went to went into this church, and it was really nice. But yeah, the first half of that trip with my friends, when I met up with the rest of the group of my friends, Amsterdam and Hamburg were always rainy and gloomy and foggy, but it also created its own vibe, and it was enjoyable with friends.
Start to a horror movie.
But man, after that week of rain and fog, I remember when we headed to Berlin, and in the morning, when we were on the train, the sun finally rose. Oh my gosh, it was so beautiful. And the rest of the trip from there was relatively sunny, which was great. Like when the sun came up, it instantly shifted all of our energies. Like, yes, I said it was laid back and fun, but when the sun came out, it was just so much better. Just so much more refreshing. Traveling just was so much easier. Don't have to carry an umbrella, don't have to get wet. It was just so much better and just so beautiful. As beautiful as the days were with the sun out in Berlin and Dresden, you know, at that point in time, I remember I always had this nagging worry that I had in my head. And, you know, as the trip draws closer and closer to its end, I was getting closer and closer to beginning solo traveling. Some of my friends were heading home, back to Singapore, and some of my friends were heading off to work. But as this trip draws closer and closer to the end, I was getting closer and closer to beginning my solo travels. And, you know, some of my friends were heading home and some of them were going to work. But for me, I had the plan to do these things along my travel called workaways. What they are is basically you would volunteer your service. In my case, I'm volunteering my service of taking photos, carpentry, videography, and in exchange for that, you get to stay with a local family and you get to eat with a local family, and that is the main benefit, but for me as well as a poor student, was to also mitigate some of the travel costs. But up to this point, I think it's been months since the beginning of this idea to travel, and me sending out applications to different workaways. I think I sent over 20 or 30, and some have gotten back to me, but at that point most of them were rejections. If not, they just outright didn't reply me. So I have absolutely no idea what I was gonna do for the next two and a half months. And yeah, with less than a few days left with my friends, I was starting to feel really uneasy. So I record this reflection, I'm already back in Singapore, and my Europe trip is done, but I recently met this elder gentleman, and basically he was asking me what am I going to do in my future, what are my plans, am I going back to school, am I going to work, what am I going to do, blah blah blah, that kind of questions. And while I respect and I understand his advice, I think it kind of embodies what I felt in that moment in time, or at that point in that trip, and why I felt so uneasy back then. There's always this pressure that I think all of us probably put on ourselves to make decisions that lead somewhere, that kind of gives you a future. And at that point in time, I have no idea. I had no plans, no future, and 3 months in Europe. So I was absolutely lost at that point. And with 5 days coming to an end and my uneasiness slowly starting to creep up on me, finally someone replied me, and finally someone decided to accept me. And that was it. 2 weeks out, I was heading to Sweden for my very first workaway. So stay tuned for that. But I think that was the moment I finally wrapped my head around the idea of embracing where the wind takes you and just seeing where it goes. I think whether or not I locked in the workaway that day, I think it occurred to me that night in Europe that it was just already so amazing to be all the way across the world with good friends, good company, and a nice place. It truly made me feel like I could live and be grateful for the present.